much. Thank you for coming. And thank you to the Lemon Foundation for organizing this. I think we had the idea about 3 weeks ago, and everything was organized in that short period of time. So I think in my experience, I don't think that could be done in many places in the United States. So the efficiency of your foundation is an example. And if the schooling system in Brazil exhibited that efficiency, imagine what we would be seeing today. So thank you very much for having me here. I think I'm the kind of the opening course for the major meal, which is the discussion by Matt Crowley. Matt Crowley is one of my heroes of the moment. He is a school director from a school in Brockton in Massachusetts, and it is a school that should not perform well. It is a school that should perform badly. We would expect it to, and it performs incredibly well. So I think it'll be an interesting story for you to learn about how that has happened, what it looks like, and even just to recognize that it's possible. Because I think that that's where you are in Brazil in education now, is there are a lot of demands, there are a lot of challenges, and it is easy sometimes to get negative and to say it can't happen. Well, it can. My presentation today is focused on education, but it's focused even more generally on change and reforms. My own research is looking at public management reforms in the development process. How do governments change when they need to become better to facilitate development in their countries? Brazil is such an interesting country. In some respects, it is a country that is developing rapidly, far quicker than anyone expected 20 years ago. But then there's education. And you look at education, you think, well, for a country where the economy is booming, we're a country where so many social policies are accelerating, we're a country that is at the forefront of environmental work, how come your PISA scores are not catching up? How come you aren't keeping pace with your other developments? Now, when we speak about educational reform, we generally see reforms as responses to problems, and that's how I'm going to introduce Van der Schola today. That they are often designed from the outside and not from the inside, which is a really important limitation on what they can achieve, but is also something that raises questions about how to do them better. It creates a gap between the general external reform and the contextual problem inside, and the question is how to fill that gap, which is where we will get to Brockton. So, let me move on to the first question. When we started to look at Van der Schola, I had previously worked at the World Bank, and Van der Schola was a World Bank program with the government of Brazil, so I knew a fair amount about it before I even started looking at it. And the interesting thing was that Van der Schola was created directly to deal with problems in schools. That the Brazilian education system had dealt with the problem of getting kids into the schools, but now it had the problem of quality within the schools. What do we teach them? How do we teach them better? How do we make sure that the teachers who are teaching them are actually qualified to be there, that they care for being there, that they stay there, that at the end of the year they teach things that grow the children so that they can move on to the next grade. And what we found was that there were a specific response in Van der Schola to specific issues that were experienced in specific regions, specifically in the Northeast. And that these problems were experienced at the level of the school, at the level of the teacher, and more importantly, at the level of the student herself. That you got a picture of students in certain regions who, no matter how many days they spent in the classroom, were not learning anything. They weren't learning language, they weren't learning math, they weren't learning science, but they were coming day after day after day, and nothing with no benefit. That in some of these regions, you had a problem of students who were finishing school, and they were finishing school without the equipment necessary to go into private sector, public sector, and become contributing members of society. When you started to look at the background documents for Fundescola, and it started saying, well, why do we have these problems? You started to see that it wasn't one problem in the whole country. There are many problems. And all of us know that there are many problems at schools, and there are many problems in the lives of students, and they're not the same. So I've got some pictures there. In some cases, you are dealing with rural schools. And in rural schools, you have a myriad of problems. You have infrastructure problems. It's hard to get decent teachers to go there. The students can't get to school very easily because they don't live very close. So it's just a very different thing to running a school in an inner city, where the students are very close to the school, but the school has got a big steel door and a big wall, and almost has to keep itself separate from the community because it is so dangerous. You get other schools where the problems are that the students are fighting. And one of the reasons why they're fighting and they're constantly getting into trouble outside of school or inside of the school is because their home environment is not conducive to a disciplined approach to learning. So we started to see that, you know, there are a lot of issues in a lot of these schools. And some of the schools don't have these issues at all. Some of the schools in Brazil were good schools. They were run fairly well. The directors of the school were qualified, the teachers were qualified, they were in fairly affluent areas, so the parents knew to take their children to school. The home environments were a lot more stable, so you didn't have these. So the point is that there were a lot of problems, and those problems were very local. Now the solution was better school management, which is a great solution. And it's a great solution, especially for someone like me who teaches management. And I teach management to economists, and economists sometimes don't understand why management is important. So when I see a reform that is focused on management, I say, yes, these people understood it. And not only was it focused on management in a good way, it had a lot of great ideas in it. At the heart of Fundescola was creating new accountability relationships between teachers and scholars, between the schools and the parents, where the focus was on improving the content and improving the quality of education, getting people to plan and to budget, and to think about what it is that they want to do, what resources they needed to, and how they were going to get there. It involved Gestar, which was a certain amount of teacher training that trained the teachers about building curriculum, about teaching according to the curriculum, about using common texts and scripts, and about monitoring results, using data about school performance and student performance to see how you're doing, and not just to guess, or not just to say, as Matt Crowley says, well, if the students like me, then I must be doing a good job. And all of us know that even at Harvard, if students like you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a very good job in the classroom. What is a good job is whether they're learning. Now, the thing is that all of these great management ideas had one problem. They were presented as the same ideas for all of the schools in the whole country. The same materials, the same planning scripts, the same Gestar materials, all went to all of the schools, whether you were in Sao Paulo, whether you were in Rio, whether you were in Salvador, it didn't matter. But as I said earlier, not all the schools had the same problems, and not all the schools had the same abilities to implement the reforms. So what we did was we actually went to schools, and we went to municipalities, and we interviewed school directors, and we interviewed the secretaries to find out what their experience was with Sao Paulo, with Fundescola. And we found varying experiences. The wealthier schools did great. We found really interesting stories where in one place the school director said, you know, we've always planned and we've always budgeted and we've always disciplined our students and we've always done these things, but Fundescola taught us how to do it better, because we didn't have a good way of planning, but now we have one through Fundescola. We didn't have a good way of budgeting, but now we have one through Fundescola. We didn't have good materials for training, but now we have them. So it was almost like giving them the tool that they had been trying to develop on their own, and now they could fly. These schools were outperforming other schools in the area, and they were receiving some of the bonus funds from Fundescola, and they were plowing that money back into the school. So in a strange way, the better schools were made even better through the reform. The problem was with the poorer schools, and these were the schools that were targeted. Where we went there, we would find the school director saying, I work 20 hours a day, I work 7 days a week, and that's before Fundescola came, and now I have to do a plan. I don't know how to plan, and they want me to budget. I don't know how to budget. The secretariat used to do the budgeting. I don't have that capacity. I don't have any teachers who have any time. If I ask them to do one more thing, they're going to leave. So I do it myself, and I try to do it at home, and then we send it to the people, and they tell us we did it wrong. So because we did it wrong, they won't give us the additional money. So now we're in a position where they've created a management catastrophe, is one of the words that the school principal used. Your management solution is our management catastrophe, because we don't have the capacity to use it. And even if we did use it, it doesn't necessarily deal with our problems. Our problems are social problems. So Fundescola, in one place, some of the teachers said, Fundescola requires us to have parent involvement in the life of the school. And they said, have you seen where our school is? Now, to get to the school, it was an inner city school, and I want to say that it was in Salvador. And my students who did the research, they took photos. They said it was very hard to find because there was just a long wall and then a big steel door. And that was the door for the school. And you had to knock on the door, and then they opened up a little, a little window in the door, so that they could see that it wasn't somebody coming with a weapon to harm them. And then they would let them in, and they would close the door. And so the director said, we don't want our parents involved in the school. We want to keep our school closed. We don't want people coming in. It's a very dangerous neighborhood. It's a very difficult place to teach. But the requirement is that we have parents involved, but that's not going to happen. Now, in these places, what we said was, Fundescola is a great idea, but it doesn't fit very well. It's like a square peg in a round hole. Do you have a saying like that in Portuguese? Square peg in a round hole? You don't have that? Do you have anything similar? You'd translate it differently. Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying? Doesn't fit. Doesn't work. They don't have the ability to use it. Now, I see this all over the world, and the metaphor that I use is like a hippopotamus in the Sahara. And if you take a hippopotamus to the Sahara, because you think, well, a hippopotamus is a fine, strong beast. But if you take it to the Sahara, it's a problem, because hippopotamuses, they need water. And if you don't give them any water, they're going to die. So what happens is that they end up taking all the water that you have, and they die anyway, and they don't do anything useful for you. And this is what we found in some of the places. Quebrangulo, is that the right pronunciation? Quebrangulo is a very, very small town in the northeast that most of you will never have heard of. We went there, and we met a school director who was crying about Fundescola, and who said, we wish that we could use it, but it's just killing us. It's killing us. It's like a big burden on our shoulders. It's too difficult. It's not what we need. For her, it was like the hippo. She had to do it, but it wasn't useful. The interesting thing is, hippos don't live in the Sahara, but there's an artist in New York City who paints pictures of hippos in the Sahara. And I thought this was a great picture because it shows the hippo has taken over the tent. The person who bought the hippo has to now live outside the tent because it doesn't work. It's irrelevant. There is one of my favorite political scientists is a man called Richard Rose. And Richard Rose says, if you have a reform that is outside of the capacity or the political realities of the person who's meant to implement it, it is irrelevant. You can't complain that they need the capacity or that they need to change their politics. If it doesn't work for them given their context, it's irrelevant and you need a new solution. So the question then is, well, how do you fit something like Fundescola? that is developed as a very good reform in Brasilia or in Washington to some of these local places where the problems are very real, are very complicated, where the capacity to respond is very, very small. How do you make good ideas relevant ideas? And part of the answer is that you need to reform from within the schools themselves. So the ideas coming from without the schools need to meet something from inside the schools or inside the municipalities that are pushing for reform and that they can meet. And that this is the thing that we saw was very important, but at the moment in Brazil and in many places, it isn't part of the reform. No one is thinking about it. Where you get this impetus from the inside meeting these good ideas from the outside, it's more by luck than by design. It's something that happens almost as a miracle, that you find a fantastic principal who just sees, this can change my school, takes it on board, and you know what happens? It does change the school. But the challenge is, how do we go beyond relying on luck, and how do we actually think about ways in which we can start to work within schools to create the appetite, to create the demand for change, that they then can use these very good ideas that come from Brasilia, that come from the Lemon Foundation, that come from Washington, or that come from a place like Harvard, where I teach. And I want to move quickly to, let's get to Brockton. As I introduced Brockton, I said, Brockton is one of these schools. The United States has had many reforms, like Brazil. When we went to the school directors and we said, tell us about Fundescola, their usual response was, that's just another one of the things. And they would give us a long list. They would say, we've had PDE, we've had whatever, long list of all the reforms. And they said, this is just another one. In the United States, it's similar. And in the United States, the most recent one has been called No Child Left Behind, which is very similar to a lot of the reforms that you have here. It involves measurement, it involves tying money to performance. The problem is that a lot of the schools in the United States that it was targeted at have also not improved. They also haven't been able to take advantage. But Brockton High has. It's a school that built the cognitive capacities in its own staff so that they could understand the vision of these broader reforms, so that they could use the content of the reform to improve their own context, and that it could achieve solutions that inspire people to do more. Things that the community cared about, things that the teachers cared about. Yesterday we met with a couple of people and I said, but how do you keep your teachers there? And I said, well, you know, you're asking the right person, because Matt Crowley has been at the school for 14 years. He was saying that the average in the United States is that teachers come into an inner city school, an urban school, and they leave within 4 because they get burnt out, because the job is so hard and they don't have enough money. But it can be done. You can build a team, you can inspire them, even if you can't pay them, and that's one of the things that has been done in Brockton. The thing about Brockton, however, is that it's not just a miracle. They've done real things, practical things, that I think can be reproduced in other places, that are not just about, well, if you get a good principle, then you get a good reform. There are ways in which you can engender this change from within organizations by changing the culture, by changing the way that people think about their jobs, by changing the way they structure their engagement with students, by measuring more and doing a bunch of other things in the classroom. After Brockton, I think Ilona is going to speak a little bit more about the MBA program that they have. And I'm very excited by a lot of the things that the Lemon Foundation does, but particularly by this, because people are the key. And training people to think differently about education and reform is key to creating this pressure for change inside and outside schools. In theory, we speak about changing the cultural cognitive scripts, the things that are in people's heads that determine how they think about their environment. And one of the things that we find in a lot of schools is that schools that have performed poorly for a long period of time, the people around those schools and looking at those schools expect them to continue performing poorly. And it becomes a significant limitation on doing things in the future. Now, Let me not take up more time and let me hand over to Matt Crowley, because he is the one who is more interesting, because he actually does things. Academics, we look at them. Principals, they do them. Thank you, Matt.